And welcome back to another episode of Ameer Approved. Today's special guest is Matt Stoller. He's the author of the Simon & Schuster's book, Goliath, The 100-Year War Between Monopoly, Power, and Democracy. Stoller is a director of researcher at the American Economic Liberties Project. Matt, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. The reason you're on is you had a tweet yesterday. You're talking about you read that there's a potential bailout that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are asking for $500 billion bailout. And I'm like, here we go. I've been saying this for the longest time. It's been happening since 2008. I'm like, what's going on is literally socialism for the technocrats, for the elites, and all the liabilities are then dumped on us. So I'd like your take on this. What do you see? Where do you think we're going? And what's your whole perspective on this?
Yeah, so it's just there's a huge problem right now, obviously, with the coronavirus, and the government needs to act and mass state power to address it. And that means, we're going to need to put a lot of resources into hospitals. We're going to need to put a lot of resources into manufacturing to get ventilators. And then there's going to be a lot of cash flow problems at companies. And then, for most of us, rent is due at the end of the month. And so the economy is kind of on pause. And that means that the government has to step in and do a bunch of things. Now, the problem, of course, is that it's also when the government, does this and Congress passes legislation and the Federal Reserve, which is like kind of the public's bank, acts, you got a lot of potential bad actors who can come in and ask for favors. And so we're now at the favor asking moment where everyone who is a corporate lobbyist, or kind of like the proxy, the people that like work for, financiers and billionaires and corporations, are now asking for everything that they want. So, you've got like the shopping center council coming in and asking for, hundreds of billions of dollars. And then you've got Boeing and they want their $60 billion. And you got the airlines and they want their $50 billion. You got the beer industry, they want $5 billion. Candy wants $500 million. And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, I think they each want $5 billion for their space companies. Now, it's not for Tesla, it's not for Amazon, it's for their, I think, Blue Origin. And so, and then they want a couple of other favors. And essentially what and sometimes it's straight subsidies and sometimes it's loan guarantees or loans. But essentially it's get me cash, get me favors, so that I can continue to stay in operation. And the thing is you don't want to destroy, because of like none of these companies caused this virus. This is not like something that was man-made. So you don't want to destroy the productive capacity of these enterprises just because there was a crisis, right? But you want to make sure that if they do need public assistance, that public assistance is targeted to saving the actual like productive enterprise, and that it's not like the financiers getting like their sticky fingers on the money, right? And you also want to attach conditions, because the thing is that like if they're going to rely on public assistance, then they have an obligation to the public, right? And like when I took Spirit Airlines and they canceled the flight and didn't schedule a new one for 5 days, like they weren't particularly attentive to my needs or to the needs of anyone on that plane. And I think anybody that's taken an airline recently recognizes that. And they paid off, they took 96% of the profits that they made gouging us to pay themselves money through what was called share buybacks. Well, now that they need public assistance, I don't have a problem with saying, well, we need to preserve an airline industry. It's important to be able to fly places. But I don't think we have to preserve their particular predatory business model. We can restructure it. So all of these asks from these lobbyists and what is kind of like what some of the Senate Republicans are putting forward, and actually Pelosi's bill has some bailout provisions in it as well. They're all an attempt to preserve a status quo. And that status quo was premised on the idea that these guys could gouge us because, they were in a sort of free market. There was no, they were providing a service for us, and they could charge us a lot of money for it, and set the terms and conditions. We're now at a moment where it's really obvious that this is not a free market, that this is a these are public choices. These are political choices. We are going to choose which enterprises continue and which don't, and then the terms and conditions under which those enterprises continue. And so we should make those choices and not let these guys make the choices for us. Otherwise, what'll happen after this, after this process, obviously the big guys have lobbyists and political connections, and the little guys don't. So after this pandemic is over and we kind of return to some semblance of normality, only the big guys are going to be left because everyone else will go bankrupt. So that's what we have to prevent. And right now there's a big political debate about how to do that. It's very confused. People are really scared. Companies are threatening, like if you put any limits on executive compensation, we'll start layoffs, that kind of thing. So it's really scary. There's a lot of really bad actors. But if we do actually work through our political system and say, hey, this money, this assistance has to go to the public, and the corporate restructuring can happen a little bit later, because they can just take loans from the Fed for now. They're fine. They're gonna be fine for a little bit. But if we say, we got to pay rent, help the people that have to pay rent, get the ventilators to where they need to get to, and we will restructure corporations when we get to it. Don't do layoffs in the meantime. Then it'll be fine, and we can preserve and expand and make a more democratic and resilient society.
How would you approach then helping out people directly as a bailout? Would you go oppose? Because there's a couple of different propositions I saw out there, like helicopter drops, temporary relief in the bank account. But how would you approach this?
Well, so my view, I worked in government for a while, and I think one of the things that's happened is that in America, and I think in parts of Western Europe as well, there's really been a 25-year campaign to destroy the bureaucracies within government. And there's also been a campaign to destroy the bureaucracies within corporations that make things. That's why we can't make anything here, or it's very hard to make things here. And they can make a ton of stuff in China. It's because we moved a lot of that bureaucratic competence to China. But in the government, it's really hard to actually do anything at this point, because we've privatized a lot of it. We've fired a lot of good people, and we've scared a lot of the bureaucrats into lying. So there's been a real sustained political campaign from some of our biggest businesses to break the state. Because if you break the state, then it's a lot harder for the state to tax them or to put rules on them or to enforce rules. 2008, you didn't see anyone go to jail who was a high-level executive because they broke the state. So what we have to do to address the problem now, because we have a broken state, even like some of the ideas like let's write checks and send them out to everyone, it's actually really hard to do that, right? You could get maybe the IRS to do it because they have the records, but like the IRS, they've been hollowed out. They haven't hired anyone for a really long time, and salaries have gone down. So it's actually really hard to do a lot of things that you might think would be really simple, like getting money out the door. But what we can do that's easiest is we can just pause rent payments, we can pause utility payments, we can pause a whole series of payments. And that way, people they won't necessarily be earning money, but they won't necessarily need to spend money on a lot of the big stuff. And then one thing we still can do is we can move money to cities. We have the ability to write checks to cities, and then they can take care of people that need basic provisioning. They can take care of people that are in quarantine. So that's how I do it, because I think the bureaucracies at a federal level are so hollowed out. So just like a pause on fixed obligations, and then in the meantime, you kind of like temporarily nationalize the hospitals, move them money so that they can just take care of anybody who needs to. And then, as things calm down, then you restart and get, sort of think about restructuring things a little bit so you get back to a more free society.
Would the pausing of the rent also go upstream, like pausing of the mortgages as well?
Yeah. So what would happen if you paused rent, right? And that's going to happen anyway. People don't have any money; they're not going to pay rent.
Yeah, they don't have money. Yeah.
There's going to be a rental pause anyway. And actually, a bunch of big businesses are stopping. They're not paying rent either. Well, they're not paying rent. I mean, people are, normal people are trying to get their rent together, but big businesses know that their landlords are fucked. So whatever.
Yeah, they have leverage though. What the fuck the landlord's going to do?
Yeah, and they mean, whatever. So like, so basically, what happens is if you don't pay your rent, or stores don't pay their rent, then what happens is a whole bunch of landlords are gonna be like, what do we do? Well, we're not going to pay our mortgages. We're not going to pay our loans. And then there's a whole bunch of banks that are like, oh, we have all these loans that we're not getting paid, and so these are like questionable assets. Now, this is where the government can step in, because all of the losses, or like, they're not necessarily losses, because those, people will start paying their rent eventually again. So it's kind of like a loan that's frozen. Now, normally when someone's not paying their mortgage, the bank regulators say to the bank, you have to count that as a loss. And if you have enough losses, then we're going to force you into bankruptcy. But they can just say to the banks, hey, you're allowed to not count that as a loss temporarily. And so all of the sort of frozen money, or like frozen obligations, will pile up on the bank balance sheets. And then the government just allows the banks to handle those losses for a while. And then if people don't start paying their rents and they don't start paying their mortgages again, then the government can come in and eat those losses directly through a bailout, or can work with the bank to try to work out some loan forgiveness, or just say to the bank, we're going to take you into bankruptcy. But there's a lot of flexibility. But effectively, all of the losses, if you pause fixed payment obligations, all the losses end up piling into the banking system. And we actually have a banking regulatory system that does have some institutional reach. Like, they can touch the banks in a way that, like, they can't cut checks to everyone. We just don't have the bureaucrats to do that. But we do actually have the bureaucrats to talk to all the bankers and know what those balance sheets look like. So you can do that, and that's actually manageable.
But realistically, you think that's going to happen? Because for me, I have cognitive dissonance. Like, I don't understand the fact that well, I understand from a political and lobbying perspective why the bailout's happening for the big companies. That I totally understand.
The bailout hasn't happened yet.
The bailout hasn't, but it's on the table. There's propositions.
It's on the table. It was voted down yesterday. It was voted down today. Like, yeah. We need assistance. That assistance needs to get out to a lot.
Is there any bills or anyone talking on the table right now of a bailout for people with rent? Because the last stats that I saw, the amount of people in line who are applying for unemployment it's insane.
Yeah, no, we've never seen anything like this. It's worse than we didn't have unemployment insurance during the Depression, but it would be worse than the Depression.
Yeah.
In the 30s. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are talking about it. And I think that, like, one way or another, we're going to have a pause on rent, because that pause is either going to be official, or it's just going to be people can't pay their rent, right? Like one or two, right? So and everybody knows it. Like, this is not like 2008, in that 2008, and I worked on the bailouts in 2008. Everyone was scared. Nobody knew what was happening. Like, there was this huge shock to the ideological shock, because everyone was like, wait a second, I thought that, like, the free markets were a thing, and that there were never any bailouts. And it was like this really big, like, trauma to all of these people.
Free market.
Yeah, no, it's all very annoying. And I'm being very charitable right now to them. But today nobody's like, oh yeah, we live in a world where, like, the government has no role, and people are not surprised by any of this. Nobody is surprised that no one can afford, like, people can't afford rent. None of this is surprising. The uncertainty is not what's in the financial system. That is really obvious and trivial to understand. The uncertainty is the pandemic, right? And that's a health problem. So, like, the political confusion, right? They move this, like, the pigs at the trough. Like, they move that through the political system when people are panicked and confused and they don't know what's going on. And that was the case in 2008 and 9 about the bailouts. People didn't understand what was happening in the financial system, including bankers. But today, yeah, there's panic and fear around the coronavirus, but, like, people actually pretty much know what's happening in the financial system. There's also, like, a bunch of people like me and you and a whole bunch of other, probably a lot of people who are in your audience, who, like, watched the 2008-9 bailouts and are like, oh, I know what that is, right? Like, we're not fooled because we've seen it before, right? I mean, I'm watching, like, CNBC, and there's all of these investors who are like, oh yeah, I'm excited because, like, to invest, because there's all of these great buying opportunities. Like, people are not they're not scared the way of like a financial crash. The way, like I remember in 2008, and it was just like people had no idea what was going on, and that's just like not true here. This is just like the psychology here is completely different. The context is completely different. Now they may get the pigs at the trough bailouts through, but that's just going to be purely because they can. It won't be because anybody's fooled.
Do you have like a timeline for this, for everything? Like, what's your projections for this whole?
Well, they're always saying we're close to a deal. We're almost at a deal. We were almost at a deal. And today, apparently, what I'm told is that the deal between so Mitch McConnell, who's a Republican majority leader. I don't mean to get partisan, but in this case, I'm just going to be like partisan. Sure. That's what's happening. Like, really, Trump has kind of delegated negotiating authority to like his Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, who's a Goldman Sachs guy or ex-Goldman Sachs guy, and then Mitch McConnell, who's like, really sort of a libertarian type. And these guys are very pro Wall Street, and they're pushing to get bailouts to big business instead of actually dealing with the pandemic. So they're not pushing, say, for example, for money for hospitals, which we actually do need. And they're forcing the Democrats to negotiate and give away things in order to get that money for hospitals, which is crazy because this should just be a let's get the ventilators to the right places moment. The Democrats are happy to give money to big business, but it is so humiliating what McConnell is doing to them that they are actually rebelling, and they are angry about it. So what you're finding is that and Trump is really disengaged. So like this, Trump often has like, I'm not a Trump fan. I'm a Democrat, and I didn't vote for Trump, and I won't vote for Trump. And I think Trump is a lot of really bad insight. I think he's really mishandled this crisis. But he does have like some reasonable instincts on some things. Like he has reasonable instincts around China, and he has reasonable instincts around like being willing to say, no, fuck you to banks if he wants to. In this case, he is really disengaged, and he is letting the bad actors in his administration really negotiate. And that's a real problem because they are doing a disservice to him and to the country. I want Trump to succeed here, even though I am a Democrat, because this is really scary and I don't want people to die. And right now, Trump is not succeeding. And the reason for that is because Mitch McConnell, there's a lot of reasons for it, but basically he has the Wall Street guys are running the show instead of the people that actually think about health and the people that think about making things in this country. And that's a real problem. And so the Democrats are kind of like, they're mixed, but they are so humiliated by this process that they are actually saying, no, we're not going to allow for just like these crazy bailouts and not actually addressing the problem. They would allow for the bailouts if there was money for hospitals, if there was money for all this other stuff, which I think would be a mistake. I think we just need to just stuff that deals with rent and ventilators now, stuff that deals with Boeing later. That's like the way that we should just do it. But like that's the debate right now. So the deal that was almost about to be cut today apparently fell apart, and then the next McConnell is saying it's going to take until Friday to hammer out another deal. And that's, 4 days away. So that's like an eternity. So
I always, maybe I'm ignorant because I'm not in the upper echelons or keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to the political spectrum up there. But like, I always thought, why can't there just be a freeze button for everything? As we said earlier, like freeze the rent, freeze the mortgage, freeze everything, freeze all obligations for now. Just freeze. Don't print $1 trillion a day. Just freeze everything. Let's figure out exactly what matters the most, protecting people's health, helping the hospitals, getting the oxygen, getting the ventilators, getting the masks. Once this pandemic is over or controlled enough, there's going to be ebbs and flows. Then we can, in pieces, slowly start activating back the economy.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're going to get to. I mean, it is an 18-19 trillion dollar economy. There's 300 million people in America. You can't just tell them to stop doing anything. Like we all have, we're all free people. We can choose, we all have choices, and we have a political and economic system that allows for a lot of flexibility. And, thank God we do. So like, you don't want like the reason you wouldn't want just like one freeze button is because then you could like elect someone who might just use it, right? Like you don't want to like these are what we need are like really important emergency powers. Mm-hmm. But like, emergency powers are also really dangerous. Like we need to manage the power of the state at this moment, but we also need to have like checks and balances to make sure that masked power isn't used for malevolent ends, or at least if it is used for malevolent ends, like we have, a way to fight back. And that still is basically holding up. So even though there are all these really greedy, there's all this like pigs at the trough stuff, which I think is exceptionally dangerous, and the Department of Justice has asked for the right to just put people in jail without a trial, which is crazy.
That's crazy, yeah.
You're not seeing like a military coup right now. And then that's the kind of thing you could see in other countries or in other moments in history. So in that sense, like the ability to work through our democratic institutions and have vehement and bitter debates about how to freeze our like financial system and economic arrangements for a period while we work out the health problems, that's a really good position to be in terms of a political system. Like we want to have a free society, and a free society is in a moment like this, we have to develop a consensus to do that. And that means we have to go through this debate. And that's a good thing. And like, ultimately, people are going to have to make the decision. All of us are going to have to make the decision, if we do choose to freeze, to try to help each other and to not go to spring break and all of these other things that people are doing. And we're going to have to deal with people who can't afford to not go out because they have to go to work and they have to make, or we're going to need to deal with homeless people or people in prisons. Like there's a lot of things that we're going to have to deal with. And we're going to need a social consensus to do that. And if we don't deal with them, I mean, I'm like a lefty, right? So I'll be like, oh, we need to help the poor. But it's like, yeah, we do. We need to help the homeless people right now, not because it's nice, not because it's the just thing to do, although it is, but because if we don't, the coronavirus, we can't get rid of the coronavirus, and we can't ultimately have an economy.
What's your plans with that? Like, for example, California, are they putting them into some kind of big, like, I haven't been paying attention, but have they done anything?
Hotels. As it turns out, because there's a lot of empty hotels right now. And like, look, one of the interesting things is like we have 10 times as many empty houses in this country as there are homeless people, right? We do not lack there are certain ways we really lack for resources, like that are really significant. Like we can't make enough, masks, right? Because a lot of our productive capacity is in China, but we have enough homes, right? And one of the things that we're seeing in this moment is that, like, you're seeing a lot of interesting social experiments. So like Ohio basically emptied their prisons of nonviolent offenders because they were like, this is a really dangerous thing to have a bunch of people in prison. In overcrowded prisons, they're going to get infected. They're going to infect the guards. That's bad. And so we're going to see what happens there. Maybe there are too many people in prison. Maybe they shouldn't be in prison, right? And we're going to
nonviolent. They shouldn't. What is drug offense only?
Yeah, drug offenses. And maybe they're going to go out and like rob people and do bad things. And maybe they're not. We don't know. But like, we're seeing a lot of like, there's a lot of like experiments right now that are happening. And that, we're seeing like a lot of companies are giving their workers like paid sick leave, not because it's nice, but because it's necessary, right? So like, this is a moment where we are sort of re-engineering a lot of aspects of our society, but it's very weird because, this is a kind of war mobilization, and like the left kind of hates the idea of a war mobilization because they're like peaceniks and they're like skeptical. But then the right, while they like the idea of a war mobilization, they don't like the idea of doing it to like help poor people, right? So like, it's this very weird thing because it's like get patriotic and mobilize in this very like nationalistic way to do very like left-wing things. So it's like very confusing, right?
Yeah. Why is it though like that? Like I don't get it. Like if it's for the great, doesn't a quicker, safer, better reconstruction of the nation benefit everybody?
No, it doesn't. It benefits like in maybe in terms of material resources, maybe in terms of like there's people will be happier, they'll be healthier, the vast majority will be. But like if you are, there's a slogan, right, that people in the 80s use. It's called "He who dies with the most toys wins," right? Like the guys who like measure themselves based on how much money they have, not because they need more money, but because that's the game, right?
Sure.
That competitive, that sort of competitive spirit, which isn't always bad, but that's just like humans, we like to compete, right? Whether that's in war, whether it's in sports, whether it's in making money. Making money is one of the maybe less harmful ways to compete. Nuclear war would be maybe one of the more harmful ways, right? if you are like the top dog, right? And that's what you want. You want to be like running things, right? And that's what like a bunch of guys on Wall Street, they're the top dogs, right? The tech bros at Silicon Valley, like they're the top dogs. If the goal, like if people are like, okay, well, this isn't working because we have too many people that are disempowered, that can't take care of themselves, and we have this pandemic and we're all in it together. We have to reorganize power, right? So that people can take care of themselves and you can't boss them around anymore. Well, yeah, technically everybody's going to be like richer. There's going to be more innovation. It's going to be a nicer society. But also the people that were the top dogs, they're not going to be the top dogs anymore, and they're not going to benefit. And then everybody that's dependent on them, everybody who for their social hierarchy, for their sense of self, then they're going to lose that, right? So
the top dogs aren't real competitors. They're not really like, you said you're leftist. I'm a pretty hard, I'm going to say hardcore. I'm more libertarian philosophies.
Right.
I believe in, never really existed, but I do believe in like natural laws of nature, free market, like Boeing. Like if your company is that bad, I'm not saying destroy the company, but all the operators, all directors, everybody who's managing it, you guys suck. Out. No bailouts, no nothing. Let's restructure the company and bring somebody else in to do a much better job. Why on earth are you going to get a reward for being a buffoon?
Yeah, no, I mean, what these guys have done is these guys are arsonists, and they've taken a great company that could make airplanes and spacecraft, and they've ruined it. And they've smashed that capacity for cash.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. And what we do need to do is exactly what you said, which is we need to go in, wipe out, the shareholders, wipe out the board, which is just a bunch of politically connected crooks, basically, both Democrats and Republicans, and then bring in, put them into conservatorship, which is basically a temporary nationalization. Have the government put someone in, like the old CEO of Boeing's a guy named Alan Mulally, who's really good. Put him back in, let him clean it up so that we can make airplanes and spacecraft, because we need airplanes and spacecraft. And then, if you want, reprivatize it and make it a private company again. But like the point is protect the underlying enterprise. And that's just a basic bankruptcy process. Like we have the ability to do that, right?
Exactly.
It's not that complicated. So we can go ahead and do that. And we should. I mean, this is like, and I hear from people from Boeing all the time. It's like they hate the people who run the company because it's a disaster. So yeah, I mean, I don't like, but why is it so hard? I mean, there's the things. It's like like I went to Harvard, okay, and like one of the things about Harvard is that when you go there, you get like they tell you how awesome you are because you went to Harvard, and it becomes like really important to who you are. Like, sure. It's like it's important to you. And like, it took me a long time to realize, I'm just like everybody else. I'm like a fucking idiot sometimes. And like other people have good ideas. And like, I have good ideas sometimes and bad ideas. Everybody's basically like, the same. And like, we all know different things. Like I have, I have certain areas where I understand things and other areas where I'm a complete idiot. And that's true about everyone in the world. But the thing is that it was like really depressing when I realized that, because I thought I was better than other people, right? That's what you get taught if you go into these elite institutions. And you have to go through like a year or two of just being bummed out to realize that all the stories that you've been taught about yourself are bullshit. And then when you do, you come out and it's like very freeing, right? And then you're like, oh, that homeless guy who's like really dirty, that could be me if I had just had a different like set of circumstances.
Yes.
And like that sucks and that shouldn't exist. That person is not free and I am free and that's just luck. That's not fair. But like to get there, you have to go through a process of being disillusioned. Now, what that means and why that's important is all the top dogs, right? They went through or give to these institutions. And then everybody that went through these institutions, people like me, they all validate themselves based on this really sort of social hierarchy. Everyone who's an economist or a lawyer or an expert or doctor, whatever, all of these people, their whole identity is wrapped up in this social hierarchy. So when you say we need to really restructure things, you're attacking like basically the 1 million to 10, 20 million people. You're attacking their sense of selves because you're saying the stories that you've told about yourself are basically wrong. Like they're not totally wrong, but it's basically wrong. You're no better than anybody else. The institution you went through is no better, doesn't make you a better person. And like that's a scary thing to ask people to believe. It takes a
well, you're going after their ego, right? Their whole narrative.
yeah, and we're social beings, right? And like, and it's not unfair, right? It's not like, it's not that they're bad people, right? Like, I wasn't a bad person when I believed this stuff. You need a point of reference, right? We are, we're social beings, and so like we have hierarchies. There's no such thing as not having a hierarchy. It's just that like what we need we need to structure hierarchies in ways that are based on some element of merit, that are based on some element of justice and compassion and mercy and strength. And we aren't doing that right now. And so we need to reorder our institutions so that we do that. But that is a very personal thing for the people that went through those institutions and succeeded through those institutions. And there are a lot of them. There are a lot of us. Right? And that's the psychological problem that we're dealing with. Another way to put it is like, there's a bunch of fucking billionaires that don't want to give up their money. Like that's because like money is really at that level. Like money for you and me is like about paying rent, but money for a billionaire is just an accounting system for how much power they have. So that's what we have to deal with. They don't want to give up their money. They don't want to give up their power. And like, we have to build enough of a movement to take it from them.
Matt, I know you have a book you just recently published. If people want, please tell our audience what's the book about, where they can get it.
Yeah, so the book is called Goliath, The 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy. And I wrote it over the last 5 years. It came out in October, and it's about this war that we've had in America between concentrated monopoly power that starts in 1911, Teddy Roosevelt giving this speech about slave power and the special interest in the corporation. And then it runs through the 20th century all the way up until the financial crisis and the rise of big tech. And it talks about how Americans have rebelled against concentrated power. We defeated our robber barons in the 1930s. That's what they were called. It's a very similar situation to today. We had concentrated power, control of our productive capacity, essentially mini autocracies in every area of our markets. And how we defeated them. And then by defeating them, ended up also building the productive capacity to win World War II. And then after World War II, why we lived in a middle-class democratic society, and then why we chose to give that up in the 1970s and 80s. And then that leads us to today. So it explains why we have such a dysfunctional set of corporations and bureaucracies, why we offshored so much to China. And it really holds up now that there's a pandemic, because it explains how we effectively in the 1970s, and this was the key trick, we transformed ourselves from citizens to consumers. So we stopped thinking about producing and coming together as citizens and wielding power in a democracy. And we just started thinking of ourselves as consumers and saying, well, as long as there's Coke and Pepsi, and as long as there's some government regulator making sure that that's safe, then, whatever, we don't care. Food automatically grows in supermarkets. That was a really important intellectual trick, and it was a con. So if you hear things like, oh, you don't like Amazon, don't use it, or vote with your dollars in the marketplace, that stuff is all bullshit. But it was designed to turn us powerless. So that's what I go into in Goliath, the 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy. It's a fun read. I tried to make it like a story so that, because I believe people learn through stories. And it's based on my experiences working on the bailouts. It's based on my experiences working on monopoly power, dealing with big tech, and then doing just a ton of research in the archives to figure out how like previous generations of Americans and policymakers dealt with this problem.
Amazing. And so where can people get a copy of the book?
So they can get it at the local bookstore. So you can go to IndieBound. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Nobles. You can, it's a Simon & Schuster book. So it's just like it's a major trade release.
Awesome. Guys, go pick up Matt's book. Highly recommend it. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. Wish you all the best, and talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks a lot. Talk to you later.